for it, coward! You're dead, gunslinger! Not today!
Saw the town before the town saw him. Red Hollow sat low under the last light of evening, a place built out of dust, wood, and the kind of stubborn hope that usually ran out before the money did. One main street, a feed store, a blacksmith, a church with a roofline already leaning, and at the far end, exactly where a dying town always kept its last illusion of dignity, a saloon with a painted sign that had once been white. He slowed his horse before he reached the first building. Not because he was uncertain, because he was counting. The windows, the boardwalk, the gaps between men pretending not to watch him, the second-floor balcony above the saloon. The hitching rail placed too cleanly in front, as if no one wanted anything blocking the line of sight. That was the first thing. The second was the silence. Frontier towns were never truly quiet. Even bad ones made noise. A hammer somewhere, laughter from a bar, cards slapped on a table, a mule complaining about life. Red Hollow had none of that. It had the silence of a place holding its breath. He had learned a long time ago that silence like that was information. He rode in anyway. The burgundy poncho moved lightly over his shoulders in the evening wind. Dust lifted around the horse's hooves and settled again in slow spirals across the main street. Men on the boardwalk looked away too late. A woman carrying a sack of flour stopped halfway across the storefront of the general store and remained there, no longer pretending she was on her way somewhere. He reached the saloon and tied the horse to the rail. The horse did not like the town. That mattered. Animals made better first judgments than people. He rested one hand briefly on the horse's neck. Then he looked at the swinging doors of the saloon and at the faint amber light behind them. 7 men, he thought. Maybe 8, if the one above the balcony knew how to wait. He pushed through the doors. The room was warm and amber and full of men pretending to drink. A piano stood against the back wall with nobody playing it. Cards on one table, 2 bottles open at another. 40 eyes in a room, trying very hard to behave like 12. He walked to the bar and sat down. The bartender, a narrow man in his 50s with sleeves rolled to the elbow and the eyes of someone who had spent too many years witnessing things he did not intend to die for, came over and stopped at a careful distance. What'll it be? Whiskey. The bartender poured it. He did not drink. Not yet. He let the glass sit in front of him while he studied the mirror behind the bar. That mirror was old, slightly warped. Good enough. It showed him most of the room without asking him to turn his head. One man at the far left end of the bar, back to the wall, one hand near his coat, one near the stairs, seated but too straight, watching reflections instead of faces. 2 at the center tables spaced well enough to cover movement but not close enough to suggest friendship. 1 by the back door, 1 in the shadows near the card table, pretending to lose, and 1 above, on the balcony, visible only in fragments of reflection and the occasional interruption of lamplight against a booth heel. 7. He placed 2 fingers lightly on the whiskey glass. The bartender noticed. "So," the bartender said quietly, polishing a clean glass that did not need polishing, "you know." "I know enough." The bartender hesitated, then glanced once toward the mirror and once toward the front door. "That enough to leave?" He picked up the whiskey and looked into it as if the answer might be floating somewhere inside the amber surface. "No." The bartender gave the smallest nod a man could give and still mean it. That was when the man at the far end of the bar stood up. He was lean, hard-faced, and wearing the expression of a person who had rehearsed his confidence all afternoon. He took 1 step forward, not enough to alarm the room, just enough to change the geometry. "Wouldn't do that if I were you," he said. The gunslinger turned the glass once in his hand. "That's so." The second man near the stairs rose with him. Then one of the men at the center tables pushed his chair back. The room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the subtle final shift that happens when possibility becomes certainty. The bartender took 1 slow step backward. A woman near the card table lowered her eyes. Someone at the rear of the room whispered a prayer that did not have time to become a full sentence. The lean man at the end of the bar smiled without humor. "You're a long way from wherever you started." He took his first sip of whiskey. Small, unhurried. The lean man's smile vanished. "You hear me?" "I hear you." "Then maybe you understand." He set the glass down. "That depends. Is this the part where you explain who paid you, or the part where you make a mistake?" The silence after that line was different from the silence before. Before, it had been tense. Now, it had edges. The man by the stairs drew first. A fast move, professional enough. He had done this before. He did not finish. The right hand under the poncho moved once. The shot struck the stairman high in the chest and threw him backward against the rail. The second shot came almost with it, angled left toward the man at the bar before his revolver cleared leather. Then the room broke. One of the center table men fired from the hip. The bullet smashed a bottle behind the bar. The gunslinger moved not by diving, not by panicking, but with one precise sidestep that turned the long bar into partial cover and changed every angle in the room at once. That was the moment the trap stopped belonging to the men who set it. The first center table man went down. Then the second. The one by the back door hesitated. That hesitation killed him. The card player in the shadows overturned his chair and reached, late, too late. Above, on the balcony, the seventh man had the best angle in the room and the worst understanding of what he was looking at. He fired once. The bullet tore into the wall behind the mirror. The return shot took him before he could adjust. Then there was smoke, and wood splinters, and the sound a room makes when violence ends faster than fear does. Nobody moved. The bartender remained where he was, one hand below the counter now, probably on a shotgun he had been wise enough not to introduce into the conversation. The gunslinger reloaded calmly. One chamber, then another. He looked toward the floor near the bar. The lean man was still alive. Shoulder hit, bleeding hard, breathing harder. The gunslinger walked to him and crouched. "Who sent you?" The man swallowed and looked not at the face above him, but at the burgundy poncho. That was interesting. Men looked at guns first. Smart men looked at hands. Only frightened men looked at symbols. Bram Calloway, he said. The name meant something. Not enough yet, but something. Who is he? The wounded man laughed once, then winced from it. Owns half the land south of here. Thinks he owns the other half too. Why me? Now, the wounded man looked up, and in his face, behind the pain, was the faintest trace of confusion. That was interesting too. He said if you came through Red Hollow, you don't leave Red Hollow. That's not an answer. It's what he said. The gunslinger studied him for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved against the saloon walls. The sign over the door creaked once. Did he say my name? The wounded man shook his head. No, just the poncho. The room heard that. The bartender heard it. The woman by the card table heard it. And everyone in the saloon understood, in that instant, that this had started before Red Hollow. Started somewhere else. Long before tonight. The gunslinger rose. That should have been the end of it. A dead room. 7 men down. 1 name collected. A horse outside. A road south, if he wanted it. But then the bartender spoke. Quietly. Carefully. There's more. He turned. The bartender swallowed. Calloway sent word yesterday. Said if the man in the burgundy poncho came through town, nobody was to help him. Nobody was to warn him. Nobody was even to say they'd seen him. Why? The bartender looked at the bodies, then at the smoke in the room, then, finally, at the man in the poncho. Because 10 years ago, somebody burned his freight office outside Abilene, left 3 books missing and 2 men buried under the ash. The gunslinger said nothing. The bartender continued. Calloway's been looking for you since. That landed differently, not like a surprise, like an old debt arriving exactly on schedule. The woman near the card table spoke now for the first time. He's not in town. The gunslinger looked at her. She was older than the others in the room, 40s maybe, steady eyes, the kind that watched before choosing sides. He's at the Ridge House, she said, 3 miles east, Stone Place above the dry creek. The bartender turned sharply toward her. You don't know that. I do. How? Because his men bought lamp oil and rifle cartridges there this morning, more than a careful man buys if he plans on sleeping. The gunslinger looked between them. The woman met his eyes without blinking. He knew they'd fail, she said. This was only supposed to slow you down. That, finally, was an answer. He picked up the whiskey, finished it, set the glass back on the bar. The sound was small, but in that room, after everything else, it sounded like a decision. He looked at the wounded man on the floor. Tell the doctor it was a disagreement over cards. The man stared at him. You're letting me live? For now. Then he turned to the bartender. What's your name? The bartender seemed surprised by the question. Elias, he said. When this room starts talking again, you never saw which road I took. Elias looked at the bodies, then at the shattered mirror, then at the man wearing the poncho, half the territory apparently recognized before seeing his face. I never saw you come in. He gave the slightest nod. Outside, the evening had gone darker. The town still held its breath, but now it was a different breath, not one waiting for violence, one trying to understand what had just survived it. He untied the horse and mounted in one smooth movement. The woman from inside had followed him to the doorway. She stood under the saloon light, her face half gold, half shadow. If you go to the Ridge House tonight, she said, he'll be ready. He settled one hand on the reins. He was ready tonight. That was different. Yes, he said, it was. He touched the brim of his hat, then turned the horse east toward the dark line of the dry creek and the stone house above it. Behind him, Red Hollow began to breathe again. Ahead of him, the road narrowed. Some men rode toward trouble because they were brave. Others did it because trouble had already started riding toward them years earlier, and all that remained was to choose where the meeting would happen. 3 miles east of Red Hollow, Bram Calloway was waiting, and for the first time that night, the man in the burgundy poncho was not riding into a trap. He was riding toward an old fire. Tell me this, if a town stays silent while bad men do their work, is that fear or guilt? And if you had been in that saloon, would you have warned him? Because Red Hollow didn't. The road to the Ridge House begins now.